A judge ordered a Vietnam vet to take off his Medal of Honor. What happened next shook the entire legal system. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the only sound in the Monroe County Courthouse that Monday morning. It was quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of silence that settles right before something wrong gets said out loud. Harold Jennings sat 3 rows back from the bench, wearing a clean gray suit, freshly pressed, with his shoes shined so bright you could almost see the ceiling lights in them. On his chest, just above the pocket, sat a medal, round, gold, unmistakable, the Medal of Honor. The real thing. The court clerk shuffled her papers. A bailiff coughed. Then the heavy door opened, and Judge Elizabeth Carrington stepped in, robes flowing behind her like a cape she didn't quite earn. She was a tall woman in her late 50s, sharp-shouldered, with a gaze that looked like it had been chiseled out of stone. She took her seat without glancing at the room. "Call the next matter," she said, already tapping her pen against the bench. It was a probate hearing, small case, a land dispute over a piece of farmland in Aberdeen, Mississippi, the kind of land that had been in families for generations. Harold was there to testify on behalf of his late brother's son, who was trying to keep the farm from being taken over by the county. It wasn't even Harold's case. He was just there to speak about his brother's character. That's all. But just 5 minutes into the hearing, before anyone even said Harold's name, the judge looked up. Her eyes locked on the medal. Everything stopped. "Sir," she said, pointing toward Harold. "Yes, you. Step forward." Harold stood slowly. The courtroom turned. Some people squinted, not understanding what was happening. "That decoration you're wearing," she continued, her voice tight, cold, "that's not standard courtroom attire. You'll need to remove it." Harold blinked once. "I beg your pardon, Your Honor?" His voice was calm, not loud, not rude, just tired. The kind of tired that came from decades of walking into rooms where you had to explain who you were and why you had a right to be there. "You're not permitted to wear symbols that distract or influence the court," she snapped. "Remove the medal, or I'll ask the bailiff to escort you out." The room froze. You could feel it. Confusion, disbelief, then something else. Shame, but not Harold's. He looked around, met no one's eyes, then turned back to her. "With all due respect," he said quietly, "I wear this for the men who didn't come back with me." Carrington leaned forward. "This isn't a military ceremony, Mr. Jennings. Take it off." And just like that, the quiet dignity in Harold's face turned into something stronger. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just said, "No, ma'am." She signaled to the bailiff. "I'm holding you in contempt," she said flatly. "You may remove yourself or be removed." In the coroner, a young journalism student from Jackson State, just there to capture some court footage for a local internship, raised his phone. He hit record without thinking. And as Harold turned to leave, escorted but never handcuffed, he never touched the medal. He just walked out, as calm as he came in. But that moment, one silent walk, one stubborn medal, would end up on every major news station by nightfall. But what no one knew yet was that this courtroom wasn't just about to lose its silence. It was about to lose its judge. 48 years earlier, Harold Jennings stood in a rice paddy outside Da Nang with a rifle slung over his shoulder and a photo of his mama folded inside his helmet liner. He was barely 19 then, scrawny, quiet. He didn't speak unless someone spoke to him first. Folks used to call him Soft Step because he walked like he was always trying not to wake someone up. But when the bullets came down, and they always did, Harold moved, fast, smart, with just enough edge to get his men through it. One day, his squad got ambushed along a narrow ridge. 5 men pinned, no backup. Harold charged in alone, pulled 3 of them out under fire, carried one on his back for a half-mile. The 5th didn't make it. His best friend, Robbie Dale Wallace, from El Paso, Texas. The medal came later, ceremony at the Pentagon. Cameras, flags, speeches. He didn't talk much about it afterward, never hung it on the wall. For years, it stayed inside a shoebox at the back of a closet in Tupelo. But when his brother Gerald died and left that old farmland tangled in court mess, Harold knew it was time to speak up. Not about the war, about his brother. Gerald had kept that land alive through hurricanes, dry seasons, and near bankruptcy. What Harold did overseas was brave, sure, but what Gerald did here, raising 3 boys, building a house from scratch, keeping that land from being sold when their daddy passed, that was just as worthy. Harold wore the medal that day for Gerald. That morning, he woke up early, ironed his suit, polished his shoes, and took the medal out from the box for the first time in years. He pinned it over his heart, looked in the mirror, and whispered, "All right then, let's go." He didn't care about showing off. Harold wasn't built like that. He wore it because he needed the court to see. Respect matters. Not just for the dead, but for the people who lived their lives quietly, with honesty, with grit. People like Gerald. The Jennings land sat on 43 acres just off Highway 45, past a stretch of pine trees and a broken-down gas station where Harold used to buy Coke in glass bottles. The county had been eyeing that land for a decade, claiming unpaid taxes. But everyone knew the taxes weren't really the issue. That land was valuable now. Developers wanted to build some warehouse or strip mall. Gerald's oldest son, Miles, wanted to keep it. Said he'd run cattle. Maybe soybeans. It wasn't about profit. It was about roots. So Harold came to speak for his brother, to remind the court that dignity still counted. He thought a judge, of all people, might understand that. But Judge Carrington didn't see a man honoring his family. She saw something out of place, a medal, a chest pin, a challenge. And while Harold was the kind of man to ignore insults, this one hit differently. Because it didn't come from a stranger on the street. It came from the system. The same system that once sent him to war and welcomed him home with locked doors and side entrances. He didn't say that in court. He didn't need to. The way he stood, chin high, back straight, said it for him. Harold didn't ask for a fight, but now he was in one. And outside the courtroom, a storm was already building. Not from Harold, but from every person watching who knew what that medal really meant. The moment Harold was led out of the courtroom, a woman in the front row, white, mid-40s, jeans and a teacher's lanyard around her neck, put her hand over her mouth. She wasn't crying, not yet, but her face said everything. "Did she just kick out a Medal of Honor recipient?" someone whispered. "Over the medal?" another voice asked. In the back, Marcus Pruitt, the intern from Jackson State, just 21 and nervous about being in a courtroom for the first times, stared down at his phone. The video he recorded was only 58 seconds long, shaky with bad lighting, but you could hear the judge, clear as day. "Remove it or be removed." And Harold's voice even clearer. "With all due respect, I wear this for the men who didn't come back with me." Marcus didn't even know what to do with it at first. He hadn't planned on uploading it. But by the time he got to his car, the clip was already playing in his head on loop, so he posted it. No captions, no music, just, "This happened in court this morning, Mississippi. This man is a war hero." He left it at that. By 4 p.m., it had been reposted 9,000 times. By nightfall, it was on CNN. Back inside the courthouse, Judge Carrington continued the hearing like nothing happened. She didn't mention Harold again. When Miles Jennings took the stand, still shaken from what he'd just watched, his voice cracked, trying to answer a basic question about the land deed. Carrington interrupted him 3 times, each time more annoyed than the last. Miles didn't push back. He just kept glancing at the door his uncle had been walked out of. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. By the next morning, Harold's face was everywhere. Photos of him from his service days, a black and white one of him in uniform, another from the day he received the medal. His mother in the background, clutching a tissue. Veterans groups started speaking out. Posts poured in from people who had served with Harold. A man named Kenneth Duvall, who said Harold saved his life during that ambush in Vietnam, called into a Mississippi radio station and said, "If Harold Jennings walks into any room, you stand. That judge should be ashamed." But the court's official statement said something else entirely. "The courtroom is a place of neutrality and order," it read. "Disruptive elements, including displays that may influence proceedings, are not permitted. This is standard practice." Standard practice. That's what they called it. Harold didn't say anything at first. He didn't do interviews. He didn't post. He stayed home in his quiet little house with his dog, a big mutt named Chief, and watched everything from a worn recliner with one armrest patched up in duct tape. He told a local reporter who knocked on his door, "I said what I had to say already. No need to say it twice." But other people were saying it for him. A group of Vietnam veterans from across the state drove to Monroe County the next day and stood outside the courthouse in silence, all of them wearing their medals, uniforms, some in full dress blues, others just in jeans and jackets with patches. They didn't chant, didn't hold signs, just stood. One had a folded flag in his hands. Inside, Judge Carrington looked out her window and closed the blinds. But the problem wasn't outside her window anymore. It was crawling through her past, and it had just started scratching at the door. 2 days later, the courthouse lawn didn't look like it usually did. There were no angry protesters, no signs taped to sticks, no yelling, just more veterans, more families, more people standing still. A woman drove up from Lafayette with her teenage son, who had been considering the Marines. She handed Harold a letter, didn't say a word, just gave him a nod, and walked away. The envelope said, "Thank you for reminding my boy what honor looks like." Meanwhile, the video Marcus Pruitt uploaded had passed 3.5 million views. Someone added subtitles and posted a clean version. It ran on every morning show, every news feed. People who didn't know Harold, people who'd never even heard of Monroe County, started asking questions. Why would a judge humiliate a veteran like that? Why now? Why him? The questions didn't stop, and they weren't just online. The American Legion issued a statement. The veterans of foreign wars did too. Even Senator Lonnie Green from Baton Rouge posted a clip from the Senate floor saying, "If our courts cannot recognize valor when it's standing in front of them, then maybe we need to take a hard look at who we're trusting with the bench." Judge Carrington still hadn't said anything directly. She went quiet. No statements, no press. Her office said she was focusing on the docket and not engaging in public discourse. But Monroe County's residents weren't staying quiet. James Stroud, a local plumber who'd done work on Harold's water heater the year before, stood outside the Piggly Wiggly talking to a friend. "You ever heard Harold raise his voice?" "Nope." Exactly. That was the thing. No one ever had anything bad to say about him. He mowed his lawn on Saturdays, helped his neighbor fix a broken fence, donated a box of groceries to the church pantry every third Sunday, didn't miss a day of jury duty in 30 years, even though he never once got picked. He showed up for people, even when it wasn't asked. And now, people were showing up for him. But the real turning point came when a retired circuit court clerk named Lena Holloway posted a 6-line message on Facebook. Judge Carrington told a war hero to remove his medal, but let a lawyer once argue a DUI case wearing a college football jersey and jeans. You tell me what's appropriate. That post hit harder than anything else so far, because Lena wasn't just anybody. She had served in that same courthouse for 20 years. She had no reason to lie. It got shared almost as fast as the video. By the next morning, Carrington's courtroom was only half full. And not because people weren't interested. Some folks just didn't want to be in that room anymore. Others had started talking about things they'd seen, cases they sat through, the way she interrupted certain people, the way she dismissed certain testimonies. What had started as a viral moment was becoming something more serious. People were connecting dots, old dots, forgotten dots. Harold? He was still at home, still not doing interviews, still wearing the medal. When asked again if he had anything to say, he just said, "A man shouldn't have to explain decency." But while Harold stayed still, the story was starting to move without him. And where it was headed next, Judge Carrington couldn't control. Every courthouse has a back room, not the literal kind, not the break rooms or law libraries, but the places where reputations are built in whispers and taken down in silence. That's where the story started to shift. Because as soon as Harold's moment hit national airwaves, a young reporter named Olivia Chen at the Clarion Ledger started getting tips. Nothing dramatic at first, just little nudges. You should check the 2017 Turner case. Look into that custody hearing from 19. Ask about how she talks to defendants with court-appointed lawyers. Olivia was 28, sharp and patient. She didn't care about trending headlines. She cared about patterns, and the more she dug, the clearer they became. Judge Carrington had a tendency, one that didn't make headlines because it never quite exploded. But the bias was there, consistent, measured, and buried under legal language that made it sound normal. There was the case of Tyrone Bates, a black high school principal wrongly accused of theft by a school board with a long history of discrimination. The evidence didn't hold. The arresting officer admitted the mistake. But Carrington still gave a scathing bench lecture about community image before dismissing the charges. Then there was Evelyn Ortiz, a young Latina mom who had missed 2 child support payments during a medical emergency. She begged for a payment plan, Carrington threatened jail time unless she came up with $1,500 in 5 days. Evelyn was working 2 jobs and still couldn't make it. She went to jail for 48 hours while her children stayed with a neighbor. None of this had made the news at the time. Now it was front-page material. More people began to talk. Former clerks, paralegals, even a few lawyers who never dared say anything out loud before. They described a judge who smiled in public, but cut deep in court. One who used the phrase, "those people," more times than anyone could count. Never in writing, always off record. And just like that, what started as a courtroom clash with a veteran became something else entirely, a reckoning. The Mississippi Judicial Review Board, quiet for years, announced a preliminary inquiry into Judge Carrington's courtroom practices. That alone would have been a big deal. But then the governor's office said they were monitoring the situation closely. That was code for, she's in trouble. Carrington still refused interviews, but her clerk, Denise Whaley, who had been with her for almost 8 years, quietly resigned. No statement. Just walked out one Thursday afternoon with a cardboard box full of office supplies and a post-it note stuck to the side of her computer that simply read, "Truth always finds its way out." The walls were closing in. And Harold? He still hadn't said a word to the press. He was sitting on his back porch one morning sipping his coffee when his neighbor, Mr. Leon, walked over. "You see the paper?" Leon asked. "I did. Whole thing's blowing up." "Seems that way." Leon paused. "You think she'll step down?" Harold looked out toward the tree line where his brother Gerald used to set up a target stand for BB guns. "She don't seem the type," Harold said, "but pressure changes people." And pressure was all that was left, pressing down from every side, building into something no robe could hide behind. On the 3rd Monday after the incident, the Mississippi Judicial Review Board went public with their investigation. No more behind-closed-doors language, no more vague statements. They listed it plainly. Allegations of bias, misconduct, and repeated abuse of judicial discretion. They didn't say her name at first, but everybody knew who it was about. 2 days later, Good Morning America ran a segment titled, "When the Bench Gets It Wrong," featuring Harold's moment in court. They blurred the judge's face at first, but when legal records became public, the mask came off. Now it wasn't just whispers in court records, it was questions from every direction. MSNBC ran panels, local news brought in legal analysts. Even late-night talk shows cracked jokes about Carrington. One of them said, "Imagine telling a Medal of Honor recipient to take off his medal. That's like telling Rosa Parks to sit in the back for aesthetic balance." In courtrooms across the South, judges started to feel the weight. Quietly, subtly, they checked themselves, watched their tone, looked twice at the names on the docket, because the system was feeling exposed and no one wanted to be next. Meanwhile, Harold finally spoke. Not on TV, not on the radio, at a local VFW hall in Pontotoc during a fish fry. He took the mic after a few of the old-timers nudged him toward the stage. He didn't write anything down, just stood in front of about 50 people, mostly vets, mostly quiet, and said, "I've been to war. I've been broke. I've been misunderstood more times than I can count, but I've never been disrespected the way I was in that courtroom." He paused. "And the thing is, I ain't mad, not even bitter. I just think we ought to expect better from people who wear the robe." There was silence. Then a slow clap started in the back. A man with no legs and a baseball cap clapped once, then again, until the whole room followed. That clip went viral too, but in a different way. People shared it not because it was explosive, but because it was grounded, human, real. Across social media, the conversation started to shift. Less about outrage, more about accountability, more about how many people had been treated like Harold. Without cameras, without medals, without someone recording the moment. Even law students were watching. A class at Ole Miss used the case as a real-time ethics discussion. The dean reportedly said, "If you want to be a judge, you better act like someone you'd trust with your own story." The fire was spreading, not just about Harold, about the whole system. But while the state circled her with investigations and headlines, Judge Carrington herself was already making her next move, the kind that doesn't come with cameras, just silence. It came early on a Thursday morning, 3.5 weeks after the day Harold walked out of court. No press conference, no apology, no camera crews, just a single-page letter filed with the state. "I hereby resign from my position as circuit judge, effective immediately. Elizabeth Carrington was gone. The court calendar for the week was cleared by noon. Attorneys got emails pushing back hearings. Clerks started boxing up files. Her office door, once always cracked open, was now locked. No one saw her leave the building. Some say she used the back entrance. Others said she never came in at all. By the time the news hit local TV, people were already gathered outside the courthouse again. But this time, there were no uniforms, no medals, no flags. Just folks, neighbors, former plaintiffs, small business owners, standing around in the morning heat, talking about what it all meant. Inside, the judge's bench sat empty. No one said Harold's name that day in court, but everyone knew why the seat was vacant. That afternoon, a local news reporter stopped by Harold's home, camera in hand. He answered the door in jeans, a t-shirt, and an old army ball cap. When asked how he felt about the resignation, he didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. "I didn't ask for her to lose her job," he said. "I asked to keep my medal on." Then he looked past the camera. People think dignity is a loud thing, that it has to come with shouting and fists in the air, but sometimes it just sits there, quiet, and doesn't move when it's told to. The station aired the clip that night. No music, no graphics, just Harold's voice, steady and tired, speaking like a man who'd been carrying a message for years, even before anyone wanted to hear it. Miles, his nephew, called later that night. "They're saying she left town." "Wouldn't surprise me," Harold said, "but wherever she goes, she's still got to sit with it." The land case, the whole reason Harold had gone to court in the first place, quietly resolved the next week. The county backed off. Miles got to keep the land. No grand gesture, no press statement, just a signed paper and a nod from a replacement judge who this time didn't say a word about Harold's medal. It was over. At least the courtroom part was. But what lingered, what would stay, was something harder to write down, harder to fit in headlines, because the story wasn't about who lost the bench. It was about who stood their ground without ever raising their voice. A few weeks later, Harold stood alone in his backyard, hands in his pockets, watching the wind bend the grass where his brother used to keep a vegetable garden. The tomato stakes were still there, rusted, leaning, but they hadn't held a plant in years. Chief, his old mutt, lay nearby in the shade, eyes half closed. It had been quiet since the resignation. No reporters, no more camera vans, no more phone calls. Just the regular sounds again. Cicadas, wind through the trees, the low rattle of a neighbor's mower. But something had changed. Not loud, just different. At the gas station, folks greeted Harold like they always did, but with a little more pause in their voice. A kind of respect that didn't need to be spoken out loud. He got 2 handwritten letters from young veterans, one from Arizona, the other from Ohio. Both said the same thing in different ways. "You made me feel like I mattered." Harold never tried to be a symbol. He never asked to stand for anything but his own story. But that story had stretched. It reached places he'd never set foot in, touched people who'd never worn a uniform, never walked into a courtroom, but knew what it felt like to be told, "You don't belong." And he never once removed the medal, not because it made him special, but because it belonged to the people who didn't make it back. The friends who never got to argue in court, or fix up a house, or walk a dog, or stand on a porch watching over old tomato stakes. Some folks wear their pride loud. Harold wore his quiet, and in the end, that quiet shook the walls of a system that had been standing too long on silence. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Dignity doesn't have to shout, but it never folds. And when you're told to shrink, to take something off, to step aside, remember Harold Jennings. Remember that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay standing, say no softly, and not move. If this story moved you, share it. Not because it's trending, but because someone out there might need the reminder that their voice, their story, and their quiet strength matter more than they think.